Do you know why most men fail to get the attention of women they're truly attracted to? It's not their looks, their money, or even their confidence. It's the words they don't know how to use. The subtle, almost invisible triggers that older men instinctively rely on to create instant attraction. Today, I'm going to reveal 2 words that can change everything in your interactions. Words that activate a deep psychological response in women. Pause for a moment and think about your own experiences. Maybe you've had conversations with women that felt polite but flat. You've tried being kind, respectful, attentive, and still felt like something invisible was missing. If that sounds familiar, I want you to know something important. You're not alone. It rarely has anything to do with your value as a person. More often, it comes down to something far more subtle. The psychology of communication. You see, attraction is rarely logical. Attraction happens in the emotional brain, the same part of the mind that responds to curiosity, imagination, and storytelling. Most men think attraction is about flashy gestures or endless compliments. But when something becomes predictable, the brain stops paying attention. Psychologists call this habituation. When the mind hears the same message repeatedly, it gradually filters it out. It doesn't necessarily feel anything new. So when a man simply says, "You're beautiful," her brain may acknowledge it, but there's no spark of curiosity, no emotional ripple. But when the right words are spoken at the right moment, something very different happens. The mind pauses. It leans in. It begins to wonder. And that moment of curiosity is where attraction quietly begins. The older men who understand this create intrigue and imagination. Think about the last time a conversation stayed in your mind long after it ended. That lingering thought, that emotional echo, is the real power behind attraction. Because attraction isn't just about the moment you spend with someone, it's about the thoughts that follow afterward. It's that quiet curiosity. Women are constantly evaluating how he makes them feel. Does he make her mind wake up a little? A man who sparks curiosity creates emotional movement. He creates a shift in the mental atmosphere. And that shift is what makes someone memorable. We'll explore how to do that next. It's about making her feel something rare, something she wants to experience again. Older men often understand this instinctively because experience has taught them something younger men are still learning. Confidence is quiet, and emotional influence rarely comes from force. It comes from subtlety. Now, before we go deeper, let me ask you something. Have you ever met someone who seemed incredibly charismatic even though they weren't trying very hard? Someone who didn't dominate the conversation, but somehow everyone listened when they spoke? If you have, then you've witnessed the quiet power of psychological communication. And today, I want to show you how 2 simple words can unlock that same effect. Not through manipulation, not through tricks, but through a deeper understanding of how the human mind responds to emotional cues. The first word is deceptively simple. In fact, when you hear it, you might think, "That's it?" But sometimes the simplest tools carry the most profound power. That word is imagine. Now, before you dismiss it as something small or insignificant, stay with me for a moment, because this single word has the ability to open a doorway inside the human mind. When you say imagine, something remarkable happens psychologically. You are no longer telling someone what to think. You are inviting them into an experience. And experiences are the language of the emotional brain. Let me give you an example. If someone tells you a fact, your brain processes it quickly and moves on. But if someone tells you a story, your brain lights up in multiple areas at once. Visual centers activate, emotional centers activate, memory centers activate. Your mind begins constructing a scene. That's why stories stay with us long after information fades away, and the word imagine acts like the opening line of a story. It signals to the brain, something interesting is about to happen. Now picture a simple conversation. A man meets a woman at a small cafe. They're talking casually. Imagine sitting at a quiet cafe in Paris while the rain taps softly against the window and the whole city feels like it's slowing down for just a moment. Something subtle happens in her mind. Her brain begins creating the scene. She sees the cafe, she hears the rain, she feels the atmosphere, and suddenly the conversation is no longer just words. It has become an experience. Now here's the important part. In that moment, the man is no longer just someone speaking. He becomes the person who sparked the experience in her mind. Psychologically, the emotional brain begins associating that feeling with him. This is called emotional anchoring. The brain links a feeling to the person who triggered it. And the most fascinating part? Most people don't consciously realize it's happening. They simply feel more intrigued, more curious, more engaged. Older men often understand this intuitively because they have learned something about conversation that younger men are still discovering. Attraction is rarely created through pressure. It's created through participation. When someone imagines something with you at the center of the scene, they are no longer just listening. They are co-creating the moment. And co-creation creates emotional investment. Let me share a small story with you. Years ago, a gentleman in his late 50s shared something interesting with me during a workshop on communication and relationships. He would say things like, "Imagine getting lost in a little coastal town where the streets all lead to the ocean." Or, "Imagine discovering a bookstore where every shelf feels like a treasure map." He said women often continued those conversations hours later because the imagery stayed with them. Now tell me in the comments, what's one place you'd invite someone to imagine? Don't forget to like and subscribe. They remembered the feeling, and that feeling made them curious about him. That is the power of imagination in human psychology. The mind loves possibilities. It loves exploration, it loves emotional storytelling. And when a conversation triggers those things, the brain releases small amounts of dopamine, the same neurotransmitter associated with curiosity and anticipation. Suddenly, the conversation feels rewarding, it feels stimulating, it feels alive. Now I want to pause for a moment and ask you something. Think about the conversations you've had recently. Were they mostly about exchanging facts and polite comments? Or did they create experiences in the mind? If you're enjoying this conversation so far, take a moment to tap the like button. It tells the YouTube algorithm that these discussions matter, and it helps more people discover deeper insights into human psychology. And if you're new here, consider subscribing to Mindful Senior Living because we explore the emotional intelligence, communication skills, and psychological wisdom that make relationships richer and more meaningful at every stage of life. Now, let's take this idea even deeper. Because the real magic doesn't just happen when you say imagine. It happens when imagination is paired with intention, and that's where the second word comes into play. This second word seems ordinary, so ordinary that most people completely overlook its power. But when used correctly, it creates trust, clarity, and emotional weight in a conversation. That word is because. And what happens when you combine imagine with because is where things truly become fascinating. But before we explore that, I want to show you something about the human brain that will completely change the way you see conversations. Because once you understand this simple psychological principle, you will begin to notice it everywhere. And more importantly, you will begin to use it naturally. That's exactly what we'll explore next. And what you're about to discover about the word because might surprise you more than you expect. Now let's continue where we left off. You've just seen how the word imagine opens the door to a woman's emotional world. It invites her mind to participate in a moment instead of simply listening to a statement. But imagination alone isn't enough to sustain fascination. Something else has to happen next. Because when the brain imagines something pleasant, it naturally asks a quiet question in the background. Why? Why this moment? Why this person? Why this scenario? And the word that answers that silent question, the word that gives meaning and emotional weight to a moment, is because. At first glance, it sounds almost too simple to matter. But psychology research has shown something remarkable about the human brain. People are far more likely to accept an idea, comply with a request, or feel emotionally engaged when a reason is provided. Instead of saying, "Let's grab coffee sometime," you might say, "Let's grab coffee sometime because I have a feeling our conversations could get interesting." Do you hear the difference? The first sentence is an invitation. The second sentence is an invitation with emotional context, and context gives the mind something to engage with. Now let's combine what we've learned so far. Remember the first word, imagine, and the second word, because. When these two words work together, something powerful happens in the emotional brain. Imagine activates curiosity. Because gives that curiosity purpose. One sparks the mind, the other grounds it. And when curiosity and meaning meet, fascination begins. Let me show you how this might look in a real conversation. Picture a relaxed evening gathering. Maybe it's a small social event or a dinner with friends. You're talking with someone new. The conversation flows naturally. At some point, you say something like, "Imagine discovering a tiny cafe tucked away on a quiet street where the owner remembers everyone's favorite drink because he believes coffee tastes better when people feel at home." Now think about what her brain just experienced. First, she imagined a place, a cozy cafe, a quiet street, a warm atmosphere. Then the word "because" gave the scene emotional meaning. It wasn't just about coffee, it was about feeling at home. And suddenly, the conversation carries warmth, personality, and emotional texture. The man who said that didn't brag. He didn't try to impress. He simply guided the imagination and then gave it meaning. And that's where emotional magnetism quietly begins. Let me share something important here. Women often respond most strongly to men who make them feel emotionally engaged rather than emotionally overwhelmed. Loud gestures can attract attention, but emotional engagement creates connection. That's why subtlety matters so much. Older men often understand this without consciously studying psychology. Life experience teaches them that calm presence and thoughtful words carry far more influence than forced charm. They don't rush to fill silence. They allow moments to breathe. They understand pacing, and pacing creates anticipation. Imagine watching a movie where every scene is loud and dramatic. At first, it might seem exciting, but after a while, it becomes exhausting. Now imagine a movie that balances quiet moments with powerful scenes, conversations with pauses, emotions that unfold slowly. That movie holds your attention longer. Human conversation works the same way. The best communicators know when to speak and when to let imagination do the work. Now here's something I want you to notice. The two words we're talking about today, imagine and because, are not pickup lines. They're not tricks. They're not scripts you memorize. They are tools that shift the emotional rhythm of a conversation. And the most important part of using them effectively is authenticity. You must actually mean what you say, because emotional intelligence is something people feel even when they can't explain it. Let's take another everyday example. Suppose you're talking with someone about travel. Instead of saying, "I like traveling," you might say, "Imagine wandering through a place where every street feels like a story because the people who live there treat strangers like old friends." That sentence does three things simultaneously. It creates imagery, it creates emotion, and it reveals something about your personality. Suddenly, you're not just someone discussing travel. You're someone who sees meaning in experiences, and meaning is attractive. Now let me pause here for a moment and ask you something directly. Have you ever had a conversation with someone who made ordinary topics feel interesting? Someone who could talk about something simple, a meal, a walk, a rainy afternoon, and somehow make it feel memorable? Those people are using imagination and explanation naturally. They are painting emotional pictures, and they are giving those pictures meaning. That's why their conversations feel alive. Now here's something I want you to try as a small exercise. Over the next few days, simply observe conversations around you. Listen to how people talk. Notice how often people make statements without reasons. And then notice how different it feels when someone explains something with intention. You'll start hearing the word "because" everywhere. And once you notice it, you can begin using it thoughtfully. For example, "I enjoy talking with you because you see things differently." Or, "You seem like someone who appreciates quiet moments because you listen more than you talk." Statements like these create emotional recognition. They make someone feel seen, and feeling seen is one of the deepest human desires. If you're finding these insights helpful, take a moment to share this video with someone who enjoys learning about human behavior and relationships. Meaningful conversations are becoming rare in today's fast-paced world, and the more we understand emotional communication, the richer our interactions become. Now let's take this even further, because something truly interesting happens when imagine and because are used together in a slightly different way. Instead of describing a place, you begin describing a moment between two people, not in an overly romantic way, but in a way that invites emotional curiosity. For example, imagine two people having a conversation that feels so easy they forget to check their phones because they're genuinely curious about each other. Notice what that does. It describes a type of connection. It plants a subtle emotional idea, and it does it without pressure. No one is being asked to feel something immediately, but the possibility exists. And possibilities are powerful. The human brain is drawn toward open loops. When something feels unfinished, the mind wants to complete it. This is why cliffhangers work so well in storytelling. Your brain wants resolution, and when someone creates an emotional possibility in conversation, the mind naturally wonders how that possibility might unfold. Older men often understand this through life experience. They know that attraction grows through curiosity, not urgency. They don't rush emotional moments. They allow them to develop, and that calm patience communicates confidence. Now here's a fascinating truth about confidence. Confidence is rarely about what someone says. It's about how comfortable they are allowing space for imagination. A man who speaks calmly and thoughtfully signals something important. He is not trying to prove himself. He is simply sharing a moment, and that quiet self-assurance is deeply attractive. But there is one more layer to this psychology that makes these two words especially powerful. It has to do with memory. Because when imagination and meaning combine, the brain encodes the moment more deeply. In simple terms, the conversation becomes memorable, and memorable conversations lead to memorable people. But how do you make sure these moments feel natural rather than rehearsed? How do you use these ideas in everyday life without sounding like you're delivering lines from a script? That's exactly what we're going to explore next. Because once you understand how to weave these words naturally into real conversations, something surprising begins to happen. Women don't just respond differently, they begin to seek out conversations with you. And the reason behind that shift might be even more fascinating than the words themselves. We'll dive into that next. Now let's go deeper into something that most men completely overlook when they think about attraction. Words matter, yes, but words alone are never the full story. The real power comes from how those words shape emotional experience in real time. Because when a woman feels emotionally engaged in a conversation, something subtle begins to happen in her mind. She stops evaluating the man in front of her like a checklist and starts experiencing the moment with him instead. That shift is everything. Think about how most conversations begin. Two people meet. They exchange polite questions. Where are you from? What do you do? How was your day? There's nothing wrong with those questions, but they operate in the logical part of the brain. They gather information, not emotion, and information alone rarely creates attraction. Attraction begins when the emotional brain becomes involved, and the emotional brain responds most strongly to three things: novelty, meaning, and imagination. That's exactly why the words we discussed earlier, imagine and because, are so powerful. They activate all three at once. But here's where emotional intelligence becomes important. You don't use these words mechanically. You weave them into the natural rhythm of conversation. Let me give you an example from a real-life situation. A gentleman once shared a story with me about how he met the woman who later became his partner. They met at a small community event. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic. Just two people standing near a table with coffee and pastries. They began talking about travel. Now most people would keep the conversation factual. I've been to Italy. I've always wanted to visit Spain. But he did something slightly different. He smiled and said, imagine walking through a city where every corner smells like fresh bread and espresso because the bakeries start working before sunrise. Now notice what happened in that moment. The conversation shifted from information to experience. Suddenly, she wasn't just hearing about travel. She was mentally visiting the place. Her brain filled in the details, the smell of bread, the warmth of a bakery, the quiet morning streets, and because the moment was tied to his voice, his presence, and his story, Her emotional brain began associating that pleasant imagery with him. Again, this wasn't manipulation. It was simply storytelling combined with emotional awareness. Now here's something important to understand. When someone imagines something pleasant with you at the center of the conversation, the brain releases small bursts of dopamine. Dopamine is the chemical associated with curiosity, anticipation, and reward. It's the same chemical that makes a good story impossible to stop watching, or a great book impossible to put down. In other words, interesting conversations literally feel rewarding to the brain. And when someone repeatedly experiences that feeling around a particular person, the mind begins to seek more of it. This is why some people seem effortlessly magnetic. They stimulate the emotional brain without trying too hard. Now I want to tell you about another subtle dynamic that happens in conversation. It's something psychologists call emotional pacing. Imagine listening to someone who talks constantly without pauses. They jump from one topic to another, filling every second with words. At first it might seem energetic, but after a while it feels overwhelming. Now imagine the opposite. Someone who speaks calmly. They say something interesting, then pause slightly. They allow the other person's mind to process the idea. That pause creates space, and space invites imagination. Older men who have developed strong communication skills often do this naturally. They understand that silence is not awkward, it's powerful. When you say something that sparks imagination and then allow a moment of quiet, the other person's mind begins to wander through the scene you just created. It's like planting a seed and giving it time to grow. This pacing is especially important when using the word imagine. For example, consider this simple sentence. Imagine discovering a quiet beach where the waves sound almost like music because the world finally slowed down for a moment. After saying something like that, there's no need to rush into the next sentence. Let the moment breathe, let the image settle, because in that silence, the emotional brain is doing its work. Now let's talk about another aspect of attraction that many people misunderstand. Attraction is not always about excitement alone. In fact, excitement without comfort can feel unstable, and comfort without excitement can feel boring. The most powerful connections contain both. They contain curiosity and calm, intrigue and ease. That balance is what creates emotional depth. And interestingly, the words imagine and because help establish that balance naturally. Imagine sparks curiosity. Because provides emotional grounding. One opens the door. The other makes the room feel safe. Let's explore another everyday example. Suppose you're walking through a city with someone and you pass a street musician playing a violin. Most people might simply say, "That sounds nice," but someone with emotional awareness might say, "Imagine hearing music like that every evening because the city refuses to let ordinary days feel ordinary." Suddenly the moment feels poetic, the environment feels alive, and the person who said it becomes associated with that emotional richness. Now I want to ask you something again. Think about the people you enjoy talking to the most. What makes their conversations memorable? Chances are it's not just what they say, it's how they make you feel while you're talking. Maybe they tell stories that pull you into the moment. Maybe they notice details other people overlook. Maybe they speak with a kind of calm curiosity about the world. Those qualities signal emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is one of the most attractive traits a person can possess. Now here's an interesting observation about human relationships. People are drawn toward individuals who expand their emotional experience of the world. Someone who helps them notice beauty, humor, possibility, and meaning. Think about that for a moment. When someone makes your world feel bigger, more interesting, more alive, you naturally want to spend more time with them. That's exactly what imaginative conversation does. It expands perception. And expansion creates attraction. But let's address something important here. Using these words doesn't mean every conversation has to sound poetic or philosophical. In fact, the most effective moments are often playful and lighthearted. For instance, imagine a casual moment in conversation. Someone says they've had a stressful week. Instead of responding with the usual, "That sounds rough," you might smile and say, Imagine having a whole weekend where the only plan is doing absolutely nothing because peace and quiet can be surprisingly powerful. Simple, relaxed, but emotionally engaging. Now something else begins happening when conversations feel like this. People start opening up more. They share stories. They share thoughts they might not normally express, because the atmosphere feels imaginative rather than judgmental, and that openness creates genuine connection. Now, let me share a small but powerful exercise you can try in your own conversations. Over the next few days, practice noticing moments where imagination could enrich a discussion. Maybe someone mentions a hobby. Maybe they talk about a favorite place. Maybe they describe a dream they've had for years. Instead of responding with a short comment, invite imagination. For example, imagine finally standing in that place you've always wanted to visit, because sometimes dreams feel even better when they take a long time to reach. See how that works? You're not forcing emotion. You're simply giving it room to exist. And the more someone associates your presence with thoughtful, imaginative conversation, the more memorable you become. But here's the deeper psychological truth behind all of this. Attraction is rarely created through logic. It grows through shared emotional experiences, even small ones. A laugh, a story, a moment of curiosity. And when conversations consistently create those moments, something beautiful happens. The connection begins to feel natural, unforced, effortless. Now, before we continue, I'd love to hear something from you. Think about the conversations you enjoy the most. Do you prefer discussions that stay on the surface, or conversations that make your imagination wander a little? Share your thoughts in the comments. I always enjoy reading the perspectives of this thoughtful community, and if you're finding value in this discussion, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Mindful Senior Living, where we explore the deeper psychology of relationships, communication, and emotional intelligence. Because what we're talking about today isn't just about attraction. It's about becoming someone who communicates with presence, awareness, and genuine curiosity about other people. And when those qualities grow, relationships become richer in every area of life. Now, in the final part of this conversation, we're going to explore something even more powerful. We'll talk about how these words transform not only how women perceive you, but also how you begin to perceive yourself. Because the greatest shift doesn't happen in someone else's mind. It happens in your own confidence, presence, and emotional awareness. And once that shift occurs, conversations begin to feel completely different. Let's explore that together next. Now, let's talk about something deeper than attraction. Because if you truly understand the psychology behind what we've been discussing, you'll realize that these two words, imagine and because, do far more than influence how women respond to you. They change the way you communicate, the way you think, and even the way you experience the world. And that's where the real transformation begins. You see, the most attractive people are rarely the ones trying the hardest to impress others. They are the ones who are genuinely present in the moment. They notice details, they listen carefully, they speak thoughtfully, and they create conversations that feel alive rather than mechanical. When you begin using imagination and meaningful explanations in your communication, you naturally slow down. You become more aware of the emotional atmosphere around you. Instead of trying to say the perfect thing, you start noticing the moment itself. You notice the environment. You notice the energy of the conversation. You notice the small details that most people rush past. And suddenly, your words begin to reflect that awareness. For example, imagine sitting across from someone in a quiet cafe. The late afternoon sun is coming through the window, and the background noise is soft and comforting. Most people would simply continue talking about work or daily routines, but someone with emotional presence might smile slightly and say something like, "Imagine having more afternoons like this because moments that feel calm are becoming rare these days." Notice how natural that feels. There's no pressure, no performance, just awareness and reflection. And when someone hears something like that, their mind pauses for a moment. They become aware of the calmness too. You've just shared an experience instead of simply exchanging information. That's the difference between conversation and connection. And connection is what people remember. Now, here's something important that many people overlook. When a woman feels emotionally comfortable and mentally stimulated in a conversation, she doesn't just evaluate the man speaking to her. She begins to evaluate the experience of being around him. Does she feel relaxed? Does she feel curious? Does she feel understood? Those feelings matter far more than rehearsed lines or impressive stories. That's why emotional intelligence quietly outperforms surface-level charm every single time. Older men often develop this understanding naturally through life experience. They've had enough conversations to realize that people don't remember every word you say, but they always remember how you made them feel. Let's explore a simple, real-life moment that demonstrates this idea beautifully. Imagine you're talking with someone about childhood memories. She mentions that when she was young, she loved watching the rain through the window. Now, many people would respond with something generic like, "Yeah, rain can be relaxing." But someone who understands emotional conversation might respond differently. They might say, "Imagine being a kid again, watching the rain outside because back then the world felt slower and simpler." Now look at what just happened. You didn't just respond. You shared a feeling. You created a small emotional bridge between past and present. And suddenly, the conversation feels deeper. Not heavy, not dramatic, just meaningful. And meaning is incredibly attractive because it signals maturity, awareness, and emotional depth. But let's talk about another benefit of speaking this way. Something powerful begins to happen inside your own mind. When you start noticing moments worth imagining and explaining, you begin experiencing life more vividly yourself. You become more present. You become more curious. You begin appreciating the small details of daily life. And when someone truly enjoys the moment they're in, that energy becomes contagious. People are naturally drawn toward individuals who make ordinary experiences feel interesting. Think about the last time you spent time with someone who seemed genuinely fascinated by the world. Maybe they pointed out small things others missed. The way the sky looked at sunset, the sound of laughter across a room, the way a certain street felt peaceful at night. Those people leave an impression because they invite others to see the world differently. That's exactly what imaginative conversation does. It expands perception, and expansion creates emotional engagement. Now let's talk about one final element that ties everything together: authenticity. None of these ideas work if they're forced. If someone tries to artificially insert these words into every sentence, it will feel unnatural. The goal isn't to sound clever. The goal is to notice moments worth sharing. When a moment feels interesting, meaningful, or reflective, that's when imagination naturally enters the conversation. And when you genuinely feel something about that moment, the word "because" naturally follows. For example, imagine how different life would feel if people spent more time listening to each other, because most of us just want to feel understood. Or, imagine finding a place that instantly feels peaceful, because sometimes our minds need quiet more than excitement. These statements don't sound like lines, they sound like reflections, and reflections invite connection. Now I want to give you a small conversational practice that can transform the way you interact with people. For the next week, try this simple exercise. Whenever you're in a conversation, pause for a moment before responding. Ask yourself 2 quiet questions. What could this moment feel like? And why might that feeling matter? Then speak from that place of awareness. Sometimes the result will naturally include the words "imagine" and "because." Other times it won't, and that's perfectly fine, because the real skill isn't the words themselves. The real skill is emotional presence. The words are simply tools that reveal that presence. And when emotional presence becomes part of your communication style, people begin to notice something different about you. Conversations feel easier, connections feel more genuine, and attraction begins to grow naturally instead of feeling forced. Now let me leave you with one final thought. The most powerful communicators in the world, Whether they are storytellers, leaders, teachers, or simply thoughtful individuals, understand something very important. Human beings are not only logical creatures. We are imaginative, emotional, curious beings. We respond to stories. We respond to meaning. We respond to people who help us feel something real. So the next time you find yourself in a conversation, remember the two simple words we explored today. Imagine and because. One opens the door to curiosity. The other gives that curiosity meaning. And together, they transform ordinary conversations into memorable experiences. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Which of these two words do you think will feel most natural for you to start using? Will you begin with imagine to spark curiosity? Or because to add depth and intention to your conversations? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I always enjoy hearing how these ideas show up in your real-life interactions. If this conversation gave you a new perspective on communication and attraction, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the Mindful Senior Living channel. And if you know someone who enjoys understanding the deeper psychology behind human connection, consider sharing this video with them as well. Because sometimes a single insight can change the way we experience every conversation that follows. And remember this, attraction is not about tricks. It's not about pretending to be someone you're not. It's about awareness, curiosity, and the ability to create moments that feel meaningful. And once you learn that skill, every conversation becomes an opportunity for connection.